On This Week in Enterprise Tech, connectivity has been a large topic during the pandemic, but are you ready to finally move to satellite internet? Well, SpaceX's Starlink just might be ready for you. We'll talk about that. Plus, if you're starting to think about DevSecOps, you might not be aware that it may require a different approach to security. We'll discuss that with Curtis. Plus, securing your network and data is hard, especially securing email. And we have a great guest, CTO Fleming Shi of Barracuda, who will take us through the current climate and some of the solutions that they have for your organization. Shouldn't miss it. TWiT on the set. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you from LastPass Studios. Stay in control when it comes to your company's access points and authentication. LastPass makes security simple for your remote workforce. Check out lastpass.com/twit to learn more.
Podcasts you love
from people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 402, recorded July 17th, 2020. Malware behind the curtain. This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Melissa. Like expired milk, 30% of your customers' data goes bad every year. That's money down the drain. Visit Melissa's developer portal for free access to data quality APIs, demos, and code samples. Freshen up your sour data today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. And by Red Hat OpenShift. Red Hat OpenShift is a Kubernetes platform that provides a trusted foundation for the on-premises, hybrid, and multi-cloud deployments today's enterprises demand. Go to openshift.com/enterprise now to check out its features. And by LastPass. Give your IT department a break and supply them with the tools that really protect your business. Visit lastpass.com/twit to find out how they can help you. Welcome to TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, the show that is dedicated to you, the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and that geek who just wants to know how this world's connected. I'm Lou MARESCA, your guide through this big giant world of the enterprise. But I definitely can't guide you by myself. It's a team effort, so I need to bring in the professionals, the experts in their field, starting with our very own geek in paradise, Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, always amazing having you here. What's keeping you busy this week?
I'm getting close to being able to say my lab is cleaned out. I've made enough space that I can actually get some of the racks out. And so some of the gear is going to go to our public safety group, who have been the have-nots for so very long. And I want to make sure they have some computing power as they start moving into the 22nd century.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of experts, we not only have our Cheebert here, but we also have Mr. Curtis Franklin. He's the senior editor over there at Dark Reading. Curtis, how are you doing, my friend?
So far, so good, Lou. It's another hot day here in the Sunshine State, but it's nice and cool here where we're writing about cybersecurity and getting ready for Black Hat and DEF CON. You know, they're coming up in just a couple of weeks, so I've been talking to a lot of folks and getting some great knowledge on things like encryption and invisible salamanders. So lots of cool stuff coming up for the remainder of the summer.
Black Hat's coming on August 1st, is that right?
That sounds right. It goes for 5 full days, and the first couple of days, just like when it's physical, are some of the higher end trainings. People who are trying to get either certified in a particular area or really want to dive deep into a technology. The more, we'll call them mainstream security things will be coming up middle of the week. Lots and lots to see, hear, and talk about.
Looking forward to it. Well, speaking of gearing up, it's been a busy week in the enterprise, and connectivity has been a large topic during the pandemic. But are you ready to finally move to satellite internet? Well, SpaceX Starlink might just be ready for you, so we'll get into what that means. Plus, if you're starting to think about DevSecOps, you might not be aware that it may actually require a different approach to security. We'll discuss that with Curtis. Plus, your organization is constantly looking for ways to secure its network and data. Well, we have CTO Fleming Shi of Barracuda here, and he will take us through the current climate and some of the strategies you can use for your organization. But first, it's been a really busy week in the enterprise, so let's go ahead and jump into this week's news blips. Now, if you haven't been under a big tech rock this week, you may have heard about the hack that happened on Twitter. Now, first, a set of high-profile accounts belonging to the likes of Bill Gates, Barack Obama, Kanye West, and Elon Musk tweeted out a fraudulent cryptocurrency donation link. Then, Twitter temporarily blocked all of its verified users from posting in an effort to prevent any further scams. Now, what actually happened? Well, according to sources, hackers had been given access to an internal Twitter user administration tool by an employee, which actually allowed them to, among other things, reset the email addresses associated with user accounts. Now, whether the employee was tricked into doing so via social engineering techniques or it was intentionally espionage, it's not actually clear. However, one or more employees could have been tricked into sharing their credentials or ultimately into resetting accounts by claiming to be requesting those changes on behalf of Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and others. Now, the former seems to be more probable in this case because of the publicly distributed screenshots of the internal Twitter tool and because of the scale of the compromise. Now, this opens the door to a whole bunch of different discussions around security. Now, MFA has been enabled for some of these accounts, which means by resetting the email addresses or the phone number of the account, a user could provide a malicious one in its place, ultimately resetting their account's password. Now, it goes back to the discussion of standards and whether there should be a standard set of tools and steps enforced in an MFA orchestration. Now, think about that next time your organization goes to implement such technology.
Well, cybercriminals are targeting streaming services to provide pandemic entertainment. Credential stuffing has become a major vector for attacks against online services, but the media industry, particularly video streaming services and video platforms, has been hard hit with more than 88 billion login attempts across all industries during the 24 months of 2018 and 2019. During the early days of the coronavirus pandemic, that number climbed even higher, according to Akamai's newly released data. In the first quarter of 2020, the average volume jumped by an order of magnitude, with Akamai's chart showing approximately 100 million attempts per day throughout the first quarter of 2020. In 2019, the largest attack by volume comprised of 68 million login attempts on June 18th of 2019. In the first quarter of 2020, though, the vast majority of days surpassed that total with a new high of 364 million attempts on March 26th of this year. Now, India topped the list of targeted countries with 2.4 billion attacks targeting the accounts of users in that country, followed by 1.4 billion for U.S. users and 124 million for users in the UK.
Well, the headline on this really got my interest. A city builds an open access broadband network with Google Fiber as its first ISP. Google Fiber's wireline broadband is expanding to a new city for the first time in several years as part of a public-private partnership to build an open access network that any ISP can use to offer service. The new network will be in West Des Moines, Iowa. Google Fiber paused plans to expand to new cities in October of 2016 amid lawsuits filed by incumbent ISPs and construction problems that eventually led to the Alphabet-owned ISP's complete exit from Louisville. But in West Des Moines, Google Fiber will rely on the city to build a network of fiber conduits. Quote, municipalities like West Des Moines excel at building and maintaining infrastructure, at digging, laying pipes under the roads, restoring and preserving the sidewalks and green spaces, reducing traffic congestion, and lowering construction disruption, Google Fiber said in an announcement yesterday. My question is whether Google has any kind of guidance for other cities if this is to become a model. I, for one, would really love to have Orlando become a reality instead of just rumor.
Take a moment. Imagine walking into your server room after your switches decided to conk out, and you notice that the devices that you thought were Cisco equipment were actually counterfeits. That's right, lookalike devices that somehow bypass Cisco's security protection mechanisms to be considered valid devices. Now, although the firm targeted in this event was unidentified, F-Secure Consulting's hardware security team disassembled the unauthorized Cisco Catalyst 2960X series switches at the IT company's request to understand how they worked and determined whether the organization's network have been compromised. Although the equipment's electronics are counterfeit, it still needs to load Cisco's iOS firmware to pass off as a genuine box to the user. However, iOS will perform various checks to make sure it's running on genuine hardware and it's appropriately licensed, and these need to be circumvented. Now, F-Secure said it managed to identify the full exploit chain used by one of the fake boxes, involving a previously known vulnerability and a security component to defeat the secure boot process. Now, counterfeit units A and B proved to be substantially similar to genuine Cisco kits, but not identical. For example, neither included the holographic sticker Cisco applies to circuit boards of its switches. A closer examination of the circuit boards showed that copycats had different flash memory chips than the Cisco hardware and other variations, such as different Ethernet chips. Now, the two fake units used different tactics to neuter iOS systems integrity checks. In fact, counterfeit A contained an add-on circuitry which exploited a race condition in the SlimPro ROM, where code actually bypassed SlimPro software verification. And the F-Secure report explains that it also had intercepted an EEPROM control signal, replacing a certain byte in the image being loaded to modify the software behavior. Now, counterfeit B, meanwhile, incorporated the add-on hardware functionality in counterfeit A into its PCB design and replaced the EEPROM with an unknown integrated circuit. Now, the researchers say this suggests considerable resources were deployed to create the copy, and they speculate that the foregoers may have had access to either Cisco engineering documentation or invested in enough the tools to reproduce original PCB designs. Counterfeit products pose serious risks in the network quality, performance, safety, and reliability sectors. I guess the lesson here is make sure you check to see if those hologram stickers are secured on your device before you stick it in your server room.
Well, Russian cyber attackers are targeting COVID-19 research and vaccine development. Russian cyber attacks are targeting organizations involved with COVID-19 research and vaccine development, according to a new joint advisory from the U.S., UK, and Canadian governments. Cozy Bear, also known as APT-29, is a cyber espionage group almost certainly part of Russian intelligence services that uses several tools and techniques to primarily target governmental, diplomatic, think tank, healthcare, and energy organizations, the advisory states. The group has targeted multiple institutions involved with COVID-19 vaccine development in the U.S., UK, and Canada throughout 2020. It is highly likely, the report says, that its goal is to steal data and intellectual property related to vaccine testing and development. APT-29 is reportedly using WellMess and WellMail custom malware to target organizations around the world, including those working on COVID-19 vaccines. Neither malware has previously been linked to the group. The UK's National Cybersecurity Centre published the advisory with agreement from Canada's Communication Security Establishment, the U.S. National Security Agency, and DHS Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which published its own advisory for the threat and included Soarfang malware among APT-29's attack tools.
Oh, nestled between Lancashire's standout beauty, the forest of Bowland, and the breathtaking vistas of the Yorkshire Dales, the serene postcard-perfect village of Clapham seems far removed from the COVID-19 pandemic. But when the British government announced a nationwide lockdown in mid-March, Clapham went on high alert. Local residents formed what they dubbed Clapham Cobra, a volunteer emergency response initiative that aimed to mitigate the negative effects of isolation by sharing information, delivering supplies, and checking in on one another. Like many rural villages, Clapham is fairly geographically isolated and home to an aging population, with most of its roughly 600 residents over the age of 45. But when it came to confronting extreme isolation, it also had a unique advantage. Unlike much of rural England, Clapham boasts one of the best internet connections in the country, and the locals built it themselves. My question becomes, do we really need to build it ourselves to get beyond the barely adequate of most large ISPs? Perhaps shared pipes needs to become part of any new homeowners association and be run just like a community swimming pool or clubhouse.
Now, there may have been a big win for privacy on the internet this past week. A major ruling from the European Union's top court may have put a kibosh on U.S. authorities' power to surveil the personal data of Europeans and is being called a victory for privacy rights, and a call for U.S. lawmakers to roll out sweeping surveillance reforms. Now, the EU Court of Justice invalidated a transatlantic data protection deal with the U.S., ruling that European data is not safe when shared with U.S. tech companies via the 2016 Privacy Shield Agreement. Now, the court ruled that the U.S. surveillance laws, including FISA and government watch lists, are too intrusive and don't meet EU's standards for privacy rights. Now, privacy advocates at European Digital Rights called the ruling a victory for us all. Now, the decision upheld the use of standard contractual clauses, which are instruments used to export data from the EU, but the court ordered the suspension of all data transfers to countries with privacy standards considered unacceptable in the bloc. Now, more than 5,000 companies have relied on Privacy Shield for transatlantic data transfer. Now, a privacy advocate applauded a ruling which they said will apply pressure to U.S. lawmakers to urgently reform surveillance laws in the United States. Now, this is a total blow to the Irish DPC, or Data Protection Commission, and Facebook. It's clear that the U.S. will have to seriously change their surveillance laws if U.S. companies want to continue to play a major role in the EU market. Well, folks, that does it for the blips. Next up, the bites. But before we get to the bites, we have to thank a really great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Melissa. Now, have you ever forgotten to check the date on the carton of milk? Well, like milk, your customer data goes bad. In fact, up to 30% of customer data goes bad each year. Now, Melissa makes sure your data is accurate and current so you reach the right customers at the right time. Now, their tools have helped businesses maintain fresh data for over 35 years. Melissa can help you identify your customers and get to know them. Think about how valuable it could be if your organization could add customer and consumer demographic information to records such as property, mortgage data, even marital status or social media handles. Melissa will fill in the gaps by adding emails and phone numbers too. Plus, if you're looking for customer leads, Melissa can help here as well. Identifying current customers easily allows you to find new prospective customers through Melissa's prospect database. Bad data can be a time waste and cost you money. There's incorrect data entered by customers, simple human error, or duplicated records makes it easy for bad data to find its way into your system. Now, imagine if you could verify your addresses, emails, phone numbers, and names in real time. Melissa can help you verify your data at the point of entry. Now, field service professionals, sales forces, customer service, and more can benefit from Melissa's ability to ensure good data makes it into your system at all times. Imagine if a sales opportunity was there and you needed the right data, but you didn't have it. Well, guess what? Melissa can help you get the right data all the time to ensure those potential customers make it as a sale. Now, match and consolidate your records. Melissa's matching and deduplication tools help you uncover, merge, and purge hard-to-find duplicate records for accurate 360 views of your customers. Now, Melissa's flexible deployment options offer different platforms to suit any preference, business size, or budget. With flexible on-premise, web service, secure FTP processing, and software-as-a-service delivery options, you can choose the best way to meet your unique business needs. Plus, Melissa is responsible and secure. They continually undergo independent security audits to reinforce their commitment to data security, privacy, and compliance requirements. They have the utmost dedication to your data security by implementing strong controls and safeguards when processing your data. Now, I think personally the USPS needs to use Melissa because I put in a request for redelivery last week. I entered my name and address and it auto-resolved to the wrong address. And mind you, I've been living here for 10 years. Now, if they had Melissa, they could have been able to instantly verify and determine the right address and make it work. Now, over 10,000 businesses trust the address experts. That's Melissa. Trust Melissa to be your foundation for data-driven success. Melissa is supporting communities and qualifying essential workers during COVID-19. See, your organization qualifies for 6 months of free service by applying online right now. Don't put up with sour customer contact data. Try Melissa's APIs in the developer portal. It's easy to log on, sign up, and start playing in the API sandbox 24/7. Get started today with 1,000 records cleaned for free at melissa.com/twit. That's melissa.com/twit. And we thank Melissa for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's time for the bites. Now, here on TWiT, we've talked a lot about SpaceX Starlink before. Well, it seems after scraping the Starlink website, an individual has actually seen details on the upcoming beta testing and images of the user terminals that will be installed outside customer homes. Now, SpaceX is gearing up for beta trials in northern U.S. and parts of Canada. Now, the user terminal, or DISH, has received Federal Communication Commission approval, and SpaceX is allowed to deploy 1 million units. Now, the terminal size is actually only about 0.48 meters, or around 19 inches, and is based on the data scraped from the Starlink website. Now, the Starlink FAQ says that Starlink beta will begin in the northern hemisphere in northern United States and lower southern Canada, with those living in rural or remote communities in the Washington state area. Now, access to Starlink beta program will be driven by the user's location as well as the number of users in the nearby areas. Now, if you want to be part of the beta tester, you have to have a clear view of the sky for your home, the FAQ says. And Starlink system is currently made up of nearly 600 satellites orbiting the Earth that can provide internet service in a very specific range between 45 and 52 degrees latitude. Now, your Starlink dish requires a clear view of the northern sky in order to communicate with the Starlink satellites. Without that clear view, the Starlink dish cannot make a good connection, and your service will actually be extremely poor. That sounds very familiar, right? Now, Starlink terminal also has motors that self-orient it for optimal view angle, eliminating the need for experts to install it, and it can actually get a good signal most of the time. Now, the terminal can be placed in a garden, on a roof, on a table, pretty much anywhere, so as long as it has a wide view of the sky. Besides the user terminals that receive signals from space, Starlink customers will need a router to supply the Wi-Fi in their home. Now, an FCC filing says the router that could be supplied here is a dual band supporting 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz transmission. It supports the 802.11ac Wi-Fi standard with data transfer rates up to 866.7 megabit per second, in addition to older standards, including the 802.11b, A, G, and N standards as well. Now, sounds like to me, satellite internet might be back, with much less ease in the installation. Now, Chee, I want to bring you in first because you have dealt with satellite communications in the past and the networks in the past. Is this a big step forward?
It actually is. I've actually personally carried Inmarsat and Iridium setups for both data and voice. Can't say all over the world, but a significant portion of it. And this looks a heck of a lot easier to set up. The reality is, though, this is actually, the UFO on a stick is looking fragile. That's right. That's what everybody's calling it. And I'm going to imagine this is going to be a really big problem once it starts going into production, especially for people in the northern latitudes where they're going to have snow load. I got to imagine, I'm hoping Starlink at least has some code in there for the dish to shake itself periodically to dump snow. Now, the reality is the widest used satellite communications in the consumer world right now is actually all Iridium, but it's actually the SMS-based system where it's a 30-character message. And I actually carry around one from Garmin. It's actually called the InReach system. And for a little while, I was paying $65 a month, and that was for unlimited inbound and outbound 30-character messages, which is pretty cool. And we use that to have data coming in and out and do all kinds of neat stuff. So, yeah, this is going to make life a lot more interesting. And at the data speeds that they think they're going to be able to provide, which is upwards of 300 meg, according to some rumors, but they're only rumors. I got to stress that. It's going to be a really interesting alternative. Hopefully, eventually, once it goes up, it's going to be great for people like Mo and her little cabin in the woods of Texas. She's actually having a real tough time getting connectivity. And I know of a lot of people that live in the wilds of Alaska that would absolutely love having such a system. So here's hoping the price is not astronomical. Here's hoping they come up with a design that can actually handle snow load. And here's hoping the astronomers don't get really pissed off of them. That's actually an optical image of a train of Starlink satellites. This is just the first ones going over. And what happens is these guys are going across the sky, and it's driving astronomers out of their mind. Now, this is just the first one. It's hard to see the little dots, but it's going to look on your images of the stars like a zipper going by. Now, and this is just the trial. Eventually, our friends at Starlink want tens of thousands of satellite in ultra-low Earth orbit. And so the last rumor I heard is they are actually in conversation with astronomers all over the world to try and see if there's a way to mitigate this issue.
Now, I want to throw this to Curtis, because Curtis, from a small business, even from an enterprise perspective, a lot of times they have these backups, whether they do cellular, LTE, but if they're priced low enough, do you think that Starlink could be that replacement?
You know, I think for a lot of companies, Starlink could be a replacement for the LTE modems. And one of the other things that has me excited is for companies that are scattered throughout the interior of the continent. You know, those of us who live in or near large cities tend to take fairly high bandwidth internet connectivity for granted. But when you get away from the large cities, there are still an awful lot of people living in North America who don't have access to broadband much at all. There are some who can use the Hughes satellite system, although that gets pricey when you start looking at a per gig basis. There are some of the modems out there that tie to the cellular system. But for a lot of small companies, branches and representatives of larger companies and citizens, it's still just barely above dial-up in terms of what they're able to get. I think that this is the sort of thing, especially if it's priced right, that could really open up a lot of the interior of the country to business development, because it will finally bring decent connectivity. I'm excited about that possibility, and the kind of creativity that could, unleash. It's astounding to me. We're seeing lots and lots of employees be sent to work from home offices. If those home offices can literally be scattered throughout the country rather than just around the suburbs, I think they could have some fairly profound impacts.
Right. Well, I'm actually excited because obviously they're beta testing here in the northern Washington area where I'm located. And again, I think what I'm hoping for is not necessarily even to jump onto their service, but at least to enhance the amount of competition in the area, just so that it causes these hardwired technologies, both copper and fiber, to be more readily available, as well as more options and better pricing. So we'll have to see how this kind of evolves over time. Well, folks, that does it for that bite. Let's go jump into the next bite, because DevSecOps has been a pretty big topic here on TWiT, of course, in organizations around the market. But you might not be aware there's actually many different approaches to security, and you might need to do different ones for DevSecOps. Is that right, Curtis?
Oh, absolutely, because it really does play with how you can prove that you're secure. As developers increasingly adopt DevOps and other agile programming models, software security testing is becoming more complex as applications are broken down into microservices hosted in a plethora of containers. Now, new services are coming up, things like Traceable, which emerged from stealth mode on July 14th, that are looking to address some of the complexity that all of this is bringing. We know that DevOps requires lots of tools. We had just on last week's TWiT, we spent the entire time with our guests talking about DevOps and the sorts of tools that are required to make it work. Now, at the heart of the issue for developers is the difference between so-called waterfall development, where specifications flow down to developers, and DevOps development, in which fast iteration and deployment of changes is based on user stories and a flexible cloud infrastructure. In 2020, 81% of companies have adopted an agile development framework, and 75% have specifically focused on the DevOps model. This is according to the DevOps Institute's Enterprise DevOps Skills Report. Half of the companies that are doing this are finding the adoption of DevOps to be difficult. Now, DevOps calls for each team to take responsibility for the development and deployment of one or more application, frequently along with microservices. And as this happens, the number of APIs, endpoints, and types of communications, as well as the number of external parties that are making API call, explodes. There are lots and lots of ways for things to go very wrong. Now, software architectures that rely on breaking applications into microservices require more pervasive tools to gather data on runtime execution and better analysis engines to gain good visibility into the state of the application while it's running. Now, API security especially can be tricky because developers may be leaving a direct route to the application, leaving this route open all the way through not only development but deployment, making it available both to the users of the application and attackers. If that service isn't correctly secured, if the API isn't correctly secured, the visibility into the application can work as a two-edged sword. So, Lou, I want to turn to you. I mean, you are involved on a professional level with software development. Have you seen a full-bore switch in the people that you talk to, your peers around the industry? Is anyone significantly using waterfall as their preferred method of development these days?
It's funny because a lot of organizations I work with, both internally and externally, they like to think that they're moving to the agile methodology, but it's more of I like to call it a hybrid model where they do like agile waterfall, where they still do planning and they do schedules and they still do, design and, all these different timelines. And it's really hard for them sometimes when we come in and make changes or iterate on things, requirements and so on, because they're still kind of following that waterfall model. And it goes with security planning too, obviously threat modeling and security planning. And so you can see that organizations are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to become more agile, but they don't have necessarily the processes and principles in place to do that. And so that's a big learning opportunity for a lot of organizations out there. And I noticed that some of them are doing it right. And you can see that by the speed and agility that they have to respond to issues or even network and or security related issues, service and issues with their software. But you can also see that there's always room for improvement. So yeah, that's why I kind of laughed, because I've worked with organizations externally in development platforms where they're just really big waterfall organizations, and they supply your requirements to you, and then like 6 months later they come back and they deploy. And I think, over time, as people want to coexist in the current climate, they need to be a little bit more agile. So I think going forward, they're going to need the tools and the knowledge base to do that as well.
Well, you talk about tools. Before I ask Chee a question, I want to ask you one more. One of the words that we hear all the time in DevOps and DevSecOps is visibility. You need visibility into the APIs, visibility into the microservices, visibility into everything. How big a deal is it to get this visibility? Isn't it something that just sort of automatically flows from using a particular API or microservice?
I wish that was the case. I think that a lot of, whether you're building container applications or if you're building front-end applications using just big IaaS servers or whatnot, there's always different information sources and flows. And so whether it's logs from the machine or if it's network traffic, there's always these different sources. And in order to aggregate all that data and make sense out of it all, you need the appropriate tools to do so, whether it's, third-party vendor tools, whether it's built into the services that you've signed up for. Even in my group, alone, we have 3 or 4 different sets of tools for both visible insights into the health and the performance of a particular service or application, and being able to see insights and analytics on that data. At Microsoft itself has 3 or 4 ways of doing this. And I think probably even more than that. And so, it's how you really take advantage of that and be able to make sense. And that is what makes you more agile. And so I think, to go back to your question, it's not as easy as just using an API to get the data. You really need to be able to aggregate it together and use all those pieces of data to produce the appropriate insights.
Appreciate that. Now, I do have one question for my buddy Brian out in Hawaii. Brian, you have developed applications, especially IoT applications, that have all kinds of user communities and all kinds of user interfaces. One of the things we keep hearing is that in order to make an application that's developed using DevOps work, you have to expose all of these services and APIs to the outside world. Have you been able to develop applications where you didn't just have to lay bare your entire framework to the outside world? Is that still a possibility, or do we just have to live with letting attackers run roughshod over all of our secret code?
The answer actually is all of the above. The more secure API sets tend to be from the larger organizations that are willing to spend the money and time to go and build the API set and secure them. So some of the better ones, like the kits that I've gotten from Intel, from Cisco, and so forth, have been stunningly good. Complicated. Documentation's not always spectacular, but those are things that can be fixed as time goes on and fixed by the community. Some of the really cheap things that are done by, Joe Schmo in his garage, a lot of times still have vulnerabilities for Stack Overflow and things like that. Simple things that could have been secured very, very easily. And the reality is you get what you pay for. I love open source. I love community developed, but it's the quality and the security of those API sets are going to be directly related to the quality of the people building them. So, yeah, it has the potential for laying bare your infrastructure, especially since a lot of these need direct inbound connectivity through your firewalls. And yeah, that could be a really bad thing in the long run. But, it's, again, you get what you pay for. I tend to try and stay with toolkits that have been tested and been around for a while, and someone's done a lot of pen testing to it already. But you can't always do that. So that's actually one of the reasons why I'm so high on Node-RED, because IBM is standing behind it, and the IBM teams have done a heck of a lot of testing.
I don't know, this radical notion that if you want good, high-quality code, you need to hire good, reputable, and solidly informed staff. That's pretty crazy talk there, Brian. But we're going to leave that aside. We've got lots more of TWiT to come, and to take us into the next segment, Lou, we'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Curtis. That's right. Next segment, we have our guest to drop some knowledge on the TWiT Riot. But before we get to that, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Red Hat OpenShift. Now, when I say the name of Red Hat, a lot of you are probably thinking Linux, right? That's how the company first made its name, with a trusted Linux distro that served thousands of enterprise customers for well over 8 releases. But what Red Hat did for Linux, it's now doing for container orchestration with Red Hat OpenShift. Now, we all know and love Kubernetes, but Red Hat OpenShift combines the best of Kubernetes with additional features like service mesh, making it easy to connect, manage, and observe microservices-based applications. They also have operators to help package, deploy, and manage Kubernetes applications, plus serverless technology and more. Now, I can tell you from experience that operators alone will reduce the complexity of your Kubernetes application workflows. Now, all of these help developers and sysadmins do their work with greater ease and automation. That means no downloads or configuration required to get your hands on a cluster. And what's more, the tutorials aren't gated. They can help you out, and you don't have to give your contact information, so no one's going to email you afterwards. Now, for those of you who've heard of OpenShift and want to give it a try, Red Hat has a free interactive learning portal with pre-configured OpenShift instances accessible right from your browser. Now is the time to check out container technology and move your orchestrations to Red Hat OpenShift. So if you're curious about how Red Hat OpenShift works and want to check out its features, go to openshift.com/enterprise. That is openshift.com/enterprise. And we thank Red Hat OpenShift for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, it's now my favorite part of the show. We actually get to bring in a guest to drop some knowledge on the TWiT riot. And today we have Barracuda's CTO, Fleming Shi, on the show. Welcome, Fleming.
Hi, yeah, thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity to meet you guys. And I was listening to the live show, a lot of good topics like microservices and how to secure the code and all that. So wonderful stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to get some pretty amazing topics here on security and phishing attacks. But before we get to all that, our audiences love to hear people's origin stories. Can you maybe take us through a short journey through tech and what ended up you at Barracuda?
Absolutely. So when I, actually Barracuda, when I joined the company was 2004. That time we already started working on the email product. And really, the core reason is the founding CEO of Barracuda, Dean Draco, actually invited me to a lunch and basically told me about his goals. And from there, really kind of intrigued me, especially about how to provide enterprise-level email security to customers of all sizes. So that was really, really kind of keen and got me interested. From there, started building products at Barracuda. And 16 years later, close to 16 years later, a portfolio of a product that we can offer to our customers.
Now, it's a very big portfolio. Now, Barracuda is a sponsor of TWiT, but we've noticed that Barracuda is definitely an organization that's really, truly relevant in the current climate. In fact, they impact a ton of different sectors in the market. So that's why I'm really excited to talk about a lot of these topics here. Now, first, Barracuda got started in email, but it's grown over the years. What is today's hot topics, and what are people doing to protect themselves against malware and other things?
Absolutely. So, yeah, we did start with email. Initially, it was anti-spam, but we identified 13 types of different threats related to email. They're just email particular attack surface. Then right now, actually, we're really excited about our efforts in connecting people's networks together, especially in the cloud generation, where public cloud is really the core infrastructure, and people actually build their applications. As you were talking about microservices and all the new architecture people are actually building software on for their SaaS, they're utilizing a lot of public cloud environments. And in that case, we just announced today, actually yesterday, we announced that we have a offering with Microsoft Azure is a Cloud Gen 1, which is an effort together with the Microsoft team building on top of the virtual WAN offering in Azure. Yeah.
Very cool.
So there's a lot of good things, especially about connecting folks together and getting people into public cloud because of the elastic and very powerful resources available to people who are building applications every day. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting, kind of going back to the email side of things. Obviously, email tends to be a very hot topic. We've heard a lot of news. But, I get a lot of arguments from people saying, email is kind of a secondary communication. It's, I do other things to communicate nowadays. But I'm still seeing email being a very relevant and very forefront way of communicating today. What are you seeing in the current climate that's surrounding email that organizations need to be aware of and they need to secure themselves against?
Absolutely. So email still is one of the, I will say, a lot of folks use Slack and Teams and various different collaboration tools. But if you think about email, it's probably one of the more official ways. People already got used to it. And there are all sorts of attack types, right? So especially related to the pandemic, in this kind of environment, people are working from home. every morning when you wake up, you're looking at your email and trying to figure out what are the things you have to take care of every day. And a lot of times, if you think about if you're part of the health organizations trying to actually take care of people's health, you will be paying attention to logistics and various different notices from WHO, various things. So actually, to be precise, in March, we saw over 600% growth in COVID-19 related attacks compared to February. So that is a huge jump because you can see that attackers are basically looking for ways to do anything to penetrate into people's environments. That starts from people reading the email, who are obviously paying attention to the links and documents they probably want to open, all sorts, right? So it is very important to make sure your user community in your organization are well trained and understand the risks involved. Obviously, having a solution in front of it will help a lot. And we even see attacks that doesn't even use links and attachments because those attacks are almost like blackmail. And so generally speaking, everyone's exposed to email, regardless how folks are already starting moving towards other collaboration tools.
Right. It's interesting because you see a lot of services, you see a lot of instructional things, even from IT pros that'll send it to their users saying, hey, go authorize this permission or go do that. And they provide links or whatnot in the email. And most people, they're pretty trusting and they click on it. Now, we talk a lot about how tools can help here. But one thing we've discussed is here on TWiT a lot is around user education too, and providing some kind of campaigns around that. So I wanted to get your thoughts on what part of it could solve this with tooling and what part of it would just be user education to kind of reduce the threat surface here.
Right. So I think majority of the emails that we see every day still over a couple billion that we have to basically review every day systematically for sure. But those tools are designed to actually identify all the legitimate emails and obviously identify all the things that looks suspicious. So anything with an attachment that we can actually do a scan on, let it be a static analysis or dynamic analysis of the payload. Those are the things that the tools can do faster than humans, right? And otherwise you have to look into it in a way that could actually damage your system. The other things we do is look at the global threat level, so you can see the type of IOCs, sort of the variants that's coming out, so you can quickly stop the threats before you even get it to they actually get to the inboxes for your users. For example, recently we saw a ransomware attack. That is basically, the name is called Avedon, but we saw over 80,000 instances, but they kept on changing, and it was done by a botnet. And obviously, in those situations, we can prevent it from ever get to the user. But in the situation where the human involvement is really important, is the ones that doesn't have any links nor attachments. Sometimes these attacks are due to account takeover or basically conversation hijacking type of techniques, or obviously based on social engineering. But when they get into those situations, there's nothing to scan, right? So it's really about leading you to take an action. Let it be a transfer or making a change in the accounts or change your policy in certain things. So those situations requires a lot of training for humans, because at that point you are still going to rely on people to actually do the right thing. However, we have techniques to obviously identify spear phishing, which is really, I would say, sentiment-based, and those are things that will help filter out some of these and only leave the ones that is really hard for people to recognize and have them make a call. And that's where the awareness training comes into play. Yeah.
Now, you talked a little bit about tooling there, sentiment analysis and other things. Are there other tools to help here? Obviously, you talked about one being almost blackmail. And so the question is, it's probably not much to help there. But some of these other things like malicious links or campaigns to trick the user into thinking they're coming from trusted sources, is there tooling there to support the organization, the user?
Absolutely. So the tooling there is really analyzing the links and what's behind the links. We run it through multiple layers of our advanced persistent threat detection layers, and really identify the behavior and obviously stop the email from ever getting to the user. So those tooling do exist. The other tool that we actually have is called Barracuda Sentinel, which is a solution that allows it to really review your history of your email communication, and from there it can build a social graph between users and objects. From there, then we can identify anomalies, and that is actually pretty critical in the sense where there are tons of email every day, right? So sorting through and really understand the behavior of how you communicate with others and how others communicate with you makes a difference, because that's the intelligence that we can put into the system and tools that basically reduce the amount of things humans have to actually take care of themselves. Yeah.
Right. Now, I do want to get into other topics because obviously email is one part of it, but in this current climate, people are using remote access, RDP, obviously other communication protocols. What are you seeing there? What are you seeing the trends and how are organizations securing those pipelines?
Definitely. So I think the traditional VPN is a great thing to do network level segmentation, but when it gets to a place where you really need more of a micro segmentation, where you are actually providing access to certain applications, certain workloads, especially, most of the software engineering has had, a lot of us have moved towards using the public cloud as the infrastructure, right? So where your access control should be dependent on your condition, your laptop is running a secure environment. In fact, it's getting tougher because now your work infrastructure includes people's home networks, right? So if you think about that, it's actually kind of mind-boggling. How do you secure that correctly? So within that, I think the key there is to understand the minimal access level needed for the user to be able to do their job, and also really making sure it's conditional, right? So if you're in a Starbucks environment, maybe there are sniffers around and tracking packets, various things that could be actually disruptive into, in a sense where your remote worker could be jeopardizing the rest of the network. So I think the microsegmentation gets into a scenario where you are defining workloads, identity, conditions, posture, all those things, and then builds a profile so allow you to have proper access so you can do your job. So it is one of those key things that we strive to actually make things simple. This is why the Barracuda Cloud Gen 1 is really the first SD-WAN that runs inside of Azure WAN Hub, inside the virtual WAN offering. So making it easy for people to consume and make sure the security is there in the protocol. So I think secure connectivity is a huge thing for everybody, especially after this pandemic.
Right. Well, when we come back, we have a lot more to talk about here, and I do want to bring my co-host back in. But before we get to that, we have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is LastPass. Now, think about it for a second. Your IT department has a very big job. They have more devices and applications and remote workforces, all with new threats and regulations, making strong security that's extremely complex. Now, luckily, LastPass provides your IT with strong security that's easy to use and manage. Now, you can secure every entry point from shadow IT apps to mobile and cloud services. LastPass's access solutions give you visibility and control over every access point to your organization. Now think about how convenient it could be if you could unify access on authentication. Now, employees access a variety of applications and devices, leading to a lack of visibility of user activity between each of them. Now, LastPass Identity offers a simple and integrated view across all access and authentication tests so that they can see who is accessing them, when, and where. Now, we all know that the increased security can mean a decrease in your productivity, right? Well, sometimes exposing your business to lower productivity will make it a misnomer that increased security also reduces productivity. LastPass's authentication solutions enable you to understand user behavior, to adapt authentication based on the user, reducing friction while preventing threats. Now, managing passwords can be hard, especially for organizations like yours. Now, make password security effortless. Passwords are entryways into your business. So like spreadsheets and sticky notes really aren't secure ways of storing them. Now, LastPass's password management secures them all so you don't have to. Now, LastPass allows employees to do their work securely when in the office or working from home. They won't store your master password, which means hackers can't get to it. And encryption happens exclusively in the device level before syncing to LastPass for safe storage, so only users can decrypt their data. Now, LastPass uses 256-bit AES encryption. That is the same encryption type utilized by banks and the military, so you know you're getting the most security possible. Now, people have their favorite tool, and that saves them time and money. Mine is definitely LastPass. I love it. In fact, I use it so often, I don't even know I use it anymore. It's my favorite tool. Think about it. You have a username and password for every site you go to, especially the ones that are most important, right? I just did my taxes. I had to go to those financial sites. I have a different password username for every one of those, business sites, social networks, email. I just can't secure these things with the same thing. Well, I use LastPass to ensure I don't have to worry about remembering those unique passwords. Now, I have integrated with Active Directory, so now I only have to remember my master password for Active Directory, my network login, and now I have access to all my passwords too. Now, secure your business and give your IT department the tools to keep your business safe. Visit LastPass.com/twit to find out how they can help your business stay productive and secure no matter where your employees are working from. That's LastPass.com/twit, and we thank LastPass for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Well, folks, we've been talking with the CTO of Barracuda, Fleming Shi. Fleming, thank you so much for being here. I did want to bring my co-host back in because obviously they've been around and they know the enterprise, and I want to bring some topics in from them. Chee, I want to throw it to you first.
Hi.
Hey there.
Well, the world's changing. Shall we say I'm getting a lot of people talking about how email's too slow. We're starting to get a lot more synchronous in our nature. What kinds of things can we do to protect the more synchronous, say like Slack or other synchronous communication systems?
Right. So I think if you think about everything that's going into the collaboration tools, I think Slack is a great example because Slack, you have people working in Slack actually using as a workflow engine at times, and also really kind of working with your systems because alerts and everything gets populated into your channels. So really still same set of assets you have to pay attention to, such as links or documents that's going in there, making sure the folks who are in your channel are the ones that you deem to allow. Then really pay attention to really like, because every company has multiple folks working in Slack. And sometimes they have different, for example, when we started using Slack, we actually have folks starting Barracuda, .labs or .something else kind of, setup. In that case, make sure your branding, everything is covered. So the multiple teams working in there should be unified into a degree where you can apply the same level of security posture and security tooling to make sure you don't have a situation where a user believe that is your company's Slack channel and end up being there and exposing certain things. So there are a lot of things I think Slack probably knows much about related to the content inside, but really it's not too different from email. So email, SMTP, obviously, the protocol that transmits the email is still synchronous. It's the humans that actually read the email. It's later on, but that process of actually transmitting the email is still, you want that delivery to be within seconds. And when that happens, we obviously review the links, review the attachments. All that can be done on a platform like Slack and Teams and things like that as well.
Well, how about I ask the how do I get started question? A lot of our viewers are actually really varied. We've got small mom and pops organizations all the way up to Fortune 500 and multinational. What are the steps that our clients, our viewers are going to need to look at? So what kind of introspection do they have to do or should do before they start talking to someone like Barracuda?
Right. I think that's a great question. So really, maybe, we have a lot of free tools, but the one that I think it's a ebook that we published in Barracuda. You can actually get your hands on that. It describes the 13 types of email threats, right? And a lot of these threats are actually, I would say, overlaps with other collaboration tools. Like I mentioned about, the brand impersonation. Barracuda real in Slack and Barracuda fake. Someone can create one and actually lure your users in. So the point there is, start kind of build awareness of the types of threats that's out there, and from there, then you can probably understand why you need a tool like Barracuda. And then you can probably use a free scanner. Barracuda has a free scanner. We will talk about that a little bit later, to actually just go through your inbox, because if you're already on Office 365, that will be great, because then the scanner will be able to work without interrupting at all with your normal email flow, and be able to identify these threats and basically point out where the problems are. And from there, then you can identify which feature you want to turn on, how you want to turn it on, to make sure you're securing your user base.
Well, one of the things that I'm curious about, we've talked about the fact that email is seen as a somewhat more official form of communication in this day of various messaging services, but it's also being used by a lot of companies as a primary way of dealing with their customers. And in many of these cases, the companies are using some fairly sophisticated bot technology to reply to customer queries and even go through multiple steps of a customer engagement process. With the use of bots increasing, what is that doing to the way that Barracuda has to deal with email content? Because now you've got good bots and bad bots, helpful bots and spam bots and all of this. How are bots changing what you're having to do?
Absolutely. That's a great question, actually. The communication, the reason people use automation is to speed things up and obviously take care of communication in a way that customer feel that immediate, response. So I think the way you think through that is, from Barracuda's perspective, first of all, when we see the bot traffic, we obviously honor DKIM and DMARC, these technologies, to make sure we have a legitimate emailer that's going through for identity, right? So I think those are areas people will focus on to make sure you have the right settings and your right records for DMARC, so people can trust the email flow. And obviously, when you don't do that, there's multiple, unfortunately, there are multiple impacts. People can impersonate you. They can bring the bad bots that look like good bots, and really do it well, because the domain will be, replied to the right domain. So generally, those are the things I think we are obviously recommending companies and customers to pay attention to, make sure they're doing the right thing. Separately, we do have systems that constantly scans all the payloads, all the assets within an email message, all the body parts, and also the envelopes and reputation, everything that's involved related to that email message. So even if it's a legitimate bot, automation, it will be recognized. But obviously, a lot of times people still, get attacked, and less of the bots, but I've seen a lot of impersonation in the COVID-19 pandemic that was pretty scary. So, yeah. Right.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned in your answer then was the technology and standards, things like DMARC and others that companies have at their disposal to use to make their email as secure and reliable as possible. So this is likely to be a little bit of a tricky question for you, given what your company does, but are the tools available on a standards basis to allow a company to secure their email? In other words, if a company wanted to, sort of go bare, not bring in a partner like Barracuda, Are the tools there to let them do that, or are we still at a point where in order to be secure, a company really needs some partner to help with email security?
Right. Yeah, so some of the standard tools are available. You can utilize those, but it's only going to get you so far. The ones that's really tricky, like spear phishing, is social engineered attacks that basically comes into the environment that is obviously abnormal communication. And also, for another example, account takeover. If there are weak passwords. Good thing we heard the LastPass commercial earlier. But really, if there's weak passwords, people can get into inactive accounts and activate them. Or even active accounts, they can actually become a sleeper inside of your accounts and change your routing rule for your message. Then they can get into the communication that a CEO or a CFO might be on. So the point there is there are some tools to get you as far as that you can, but the sophistication in the attacks have really risen to a point where you got to have some level of artificial intelligence based on the data that and the communication patterns that you have to be really well covered. Otherwise, some of the most nasty attacks or targeted attacks are not going to be, with the standard tools, you're not going to be able to stop. Hopefully that answers your question.
Absolutely. So I had one quick question. I mean, we talked a lot about, a lot of the services that are out there, and we talked about a lot of the threats. What about differences in regions around the world? What are we seeing from a trend perspective? Are, organizations in the EU being affected differently than organizations in, let's say, EMEA or so on in other places? Asia Pac?
Actually, that's a great question. A lot of the attacks in the recent month are actually very global, affecting many. So, like I mentioned, in March, we saw a uptick in the pandemic-related attacks, phishing attacks. Then we saw impersonation attacks later, like in April, May timeframe. We actually saw WHO impersonation beyond just asking for donation or anything, but it actually talks about vaccines and treatments. Then, in fact, I had another sample that was attacking Canada in terms of, a healthcare organization was under attack because it had a Trojan basically infested document that basically was teed up as this is a list of employees that's infecting our organization, right? So those are really, I think, pervasive in the sense where it's driving people crazy in the time when people needs to actually pay attention to a lot of the things. So the trend is really driven right now by the pandemic on the attacks. And obviously, I tell you, sounds crazy, but we also saw attacks based on filling out a form and anonymously tell us your feedback on Black Lives Matter. So they're constantly staying on top of the news cycles and really producing some really effective weapons to fool people. So and I won't be surprised. There will be attacks related to election that's coming in November. Yeah.
Right. I guess that throws my last question here because we're running a little bit low on time. How about elections? What can organizations do to protect them against some of these trends that are coming up? Obviously, they proactively should be aware that it's coming. Is there anything they can do from a tooling perspective or from a user perspective to help protect them against these things, against these campaigns?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, definitely. Partially, it's training your users, awareness training. Partially is really putting the right tools in place. So the traditional gateway email flow in the stream kind of scan, it's going to get you pretty far. Like if you do DMARC DKIM, it's gonna protect your brand, and obviously that's good. Then if you go a little beyond that, go to the gateway solutions, that's good. But then you need to really cover the last mile with a bunch of really powerful tools that really studies your email pattern, your user behavior, your overall communication behavior. From there, then the system and tools like what we have can actually address those very dangerous attacks, especially on high-value assets, including the C-suite, for example, your executives and your financial controller folks in the group. Yeah.
Right. Well, Fleming, thanks so much for being here. Like I said, we're running low on time, but I didn't want to give you a chance to maybe tell the folks at home where organizations can go to learn more about Barracuda and all that it has to offer.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to point out is we have a set of scanners that can actually help you get started. These are free scanners. So there's one called the email threat scan. It's scan.barracuda.com. Just typing that URL will get you to the right place. What it will do is actually analyze, once you have it set up, it will analyze your email history and identify all the phishing attacks that could be really affecting your user base. Then we also have another one that is related to your cloud infrastructure. It's CSG, Cloud Security Guardian stands for csg.barracudanetworks.com/scan. That scanner gives you an overview of your vulnerabilities that you have in your public cloud environment to make sure it's compliant with all the CIS benchmarks and everything. Then we have another vulnerability scanner, which is about your application. So application scanner is it's a bvm.barracudanetworks.com, which allows you to scan for vulnerabilities in your application infrastructure or framework, and including your actual software. So that said, utilize those tools. It's free to you, and from that perspective, you can actually learn about the risks you have today.
Thanks again for being here. Well, folks,
Absolutely.
You've done it again, you said. Thank you. Thanks. Well, folks, you've done it, and you sat through another hour of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. So tune your device to TWiT for sure. I want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to my co-host. I want to start with our very own Mr. Brian Chee. Cheebert, what's going on for you in the coming week, and where can people find you?
Hey, Twitter is a good way. ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. But hey, I do email. I do lots of email. I'm Cheebert at twit.tv, or better yet, why don't you use TWiT at twit.tv and hit all the hosts. Would love to hear from you. Would love to hear show ideas. And I'd like to do a shout out to our wonderful sponsor, Barracuda. Thank you very much. And thank you for a great guest, Fleming Shi.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Cheebert. Thanks, Fleming. So I also want to thank Mr. Curtis Franklin. He's a senior editor over there at Dark Reading. Curtis, you got lots of stuff coming up this coming week. Where can people find you and your work?
Well, as usual, people can find me at Dark Reading, and especially at the edge of Dark Reading. Head there to find my longer and let's call them more entertaining pieces. Got one coming up this coming week on what we're going to do when the COVID pandemic is over. How can we safely head back into the office? Interesting stuff going there. I've got a couple of interviews that I'm going to be publishing, including one where I was talking to some very interesting encryption folks. Encryption is one of those things where if I'm not careful, the math makes my head hurt, but it's still very important. And there are some issues that are ongoing with encryption, and you don't have to use the word quantum to get into some interesting stuff. So all of that's going on. Follow me on Twitter at KG4GWA. Find me on Instagram at Curt_Franklin and find out when I'm publishing my new stuff.
Thank you, Curtis. Well, folks, we also have to thank you as well. You, the person who drops in each and every week to watch, to listen to our show, to get your enterprise goodness. We want to make it easy for you to listen and catch up on your enterprise and IT news. So go to our show page right now, twit.tv/TWiT. There you'll all find all the amazing episodes, back episodes, show notes, co-host information, guest information, and, of course, the links that we do during the show. But more importantly, next to those videos, you'll get those helpful subscribe and download links. Support the show by getting your audio or video version of your choice. Listen on any one of your podcast applications, any one of them, because we're on all of them. So go check it out right now and subscribe. Now, after you've subscribed, remember, you can impress your friends, your family members, your coworkers with TWiT, because you know what? They need to stay on top of their enterprise and IT news too, and they need the information. So supply it to them. Give them TWiT. Now, if you've already subscribed, and you're available 1:30 p.m. Pacific on Fridays, we do this show live. That's right here, right now, live.twit.tv. Come see how the show is run. Come see the behind the scenes. Come see how the pizza's made. That's right. And of course, we also have a really great audience as well at a chat room. That's right, irc.twit.tv. Check out the chat room. We have some great characters in there. Great topics, great questions, great conversations. Be part of the live show at irc.twit.tv. Now, if you can't be part of the live, we also have an after hours, I guess you could say off-peak times discussion. It's 24/7 going on right now at twit.community. Check out that great website. The hosts are out there, co-hosts. We talk about we have lots of great conversations about technology and current events. So go check that out and be part of the 24/7 discussion. Now, remember, you can always follow me at twitter.com/LouMM. There I post all my latest and greatest enterprise tidbits, plus all of the great conversations I have with you. In fact, we're just having a conversation about Cloudflare being down, DNS being down for them. That's a big one right now going on. And of course, I also post what I do during my normal work week at Microsoft out there. If you want to check out more about that, go to developers.microsoft.com/office, and there you'll see all the greatest ways to make your Office suite more productive for you. I also want to thank everyone who makes this show possible, especially to Leo and Lisa. They continue to support This Week in Enterprise Tech each and every week, and we couldn't do this show without them. And I also want to thank all the staff and engineers at TWiT. They continue to support us each and every week. But more importantly, also as well, I want to thank Chee one more time, Mr. Brian Chee. He's not only our co-host, but he's also our tireless producer. He does all the show bookings. He does all the plannings for the show, and we really couldn't do it without him. So thanks again, Chee. We really appreciate all your support. And of course, before we sign out, we have to thank Jeff. Jeff is our TD for today, Jeff. And of course, we have to thank Victor too. He's our editor, but we want to thank Jeff too, because he's the man behind the curtain right now. Jeff, thanks so much for being here. How are things going at TWiT? What's the story? What's the latest news there?
Well, we're still being safe, and we're taking it very serious as things continue to spike. So we're all wearing masks, and I'm the only one here right now. But we're able to keep these wonderful shows going, and that's what's important.
That's true. And there are some really amazing shows on TWiT. So keep watching, keep subscribing, and thanks again. And until next time, I'm Lou MARESCA, just reminding you, if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep TWiT.
Hey folks, I'm Micah Sargent, host of Hands on iOS right here on the TWiT network. If you've got iOS devices or watchOS devices or tvOS device, any kind of Apple mobile device, you are going to want to check out Hands on iOS. It is the best way to make the most of those devices. I walk through tips, tricks, and everything in between, plus answer your questions. So be sure to check it out. It's twit.tv/HOI.